Sorry, this is slightly nerve-wracking because I'm being recorded, but anyway, for posterity, when I fear I may have nothing sensible to say. But anyway, it's very good to see you all here, and I hope that you've all had a chance to see the exhibition, and your thoughts about it may be more sensible than mine. But I thought I'd just give a bit of an insight into how the show came together, but also some of the ideas, I suppose, that I had or that I have had in the process of putting it together, and actually on seeing it up on the walls, which has been very exciting. This is an exhibition that came together following a conversation with those people who look after the Arts Council collection. And Howard had already spoken to them and investigated the question of whether we could borrow an exhibition from their collection. Now, the Arts Council collection has been put together over the years of the Arts Council's existence, which is post-Second World War, although there are some paintings from before then, and I'm not quite sure how they were acquired. But it's a national collection without a home, and so its purpose, or what the Arts Council wishes to see, is see its paintings and sculptures and out in the world. And so they loan works to, individual works to museums if they make particular sense with their collections. But they also lend exhibitions to around the country. And these are often shows that they put together and package up and tie up with string and then send off around the country. But they are also keen on the idea of, if you like, opening the collection to interested parties for them to put an exhibition together using that collection. And that's what we did. It has to be said, we were worried that they wouldn't let us do it because it's a national collection, and normally they insist or they say that you can't charge for exhibitions from the Arts Council collection because it's a national collection. However, they do lend exhibitions to museums where you pay at the front door, but then don't charge for the exhibition. So we made the point to them that wasn't that a bit illogical, that they would lend to a museum that actually charged people to even come through the door, but wouldn't lend to a museum such as ours where we wanted to open the collection to everyone but needed to charge for exhibitions. And I'm happy to say that they accepted that argument, and I think actually they lent, I think it's something that they're going to do more of if they're not doing it already. So the starting point was the Arts Council collection, which is essentially a collection of post-Second World War British painting and sculpture. And the question obviously immediately arose, well, what should we do with this collection in terms of putting an exhibition together from it? And the starting point was, as I think it is for all our exhibitions, or I hope it is for all our exhibitions, was the collection. Sort of what links could be made between an exhibition from the Arts Council and with our particular collection. And of course, the great strength of our collection is around you here, in terms of British painting anyway, is in portraiture. And so portraiture was the starting point and the initial thought of the exhibition. But it got broader than that really quite quickly, flicking through the Arts Council collection catalogues, that portraiture alone might be rather limiting, and that actually there is another tradition of painting people, which is perhaps rather less well represented around us here at the moment, but was very much part of the 18th century depictions of people, and that is caricature and invention. So if you like, the Hogarthian tradition, or Rowlandson here, and I chose this to you because this is one of the Rowlandson works that's going to come as part of our Rowlandson exhibition, which is at the end of next year, coming to us from the Royal Collection, and about to open, if it hasn't opened already, in Edinburgh. So the idea was these two sort of conflicting, if you like, approaches to or complementary, perhaps more properly, approaches to painting people. Paintings rooted and drawings and works rooted in observation. And I think, one of the most spectacular examples in the show, and spectacular as an example of this kind of observational painting, is Maggie Hamling's portrait of her elderly next-door neighbour, and not her cleaning woman, but someone who, Frances Rose. And this is a painting that absolutely shouts its dependence on that sort of confrontation between painter and subject. And it is focused on the particularities of the face and the features, the asymmetries of the face are startling, the way her left eye sort of wanders off up, and is clearly exaggerated, but equally clearly based on observation. And the distinction between her nostrils, the line of the mouth, every element of the facet of the face beautifully observed and accentuated, but absolutely rooted in observation. And then, as an example of the other side of the coin and the other side of the exhibition, this wonderful early Peter Blake, when he was really, if you like, firing on all cylinders, this absurdly named Baron Adolf Kaiser, a baddie wrestler, and an invented wrestler, and one of a series of invented wrestlers and sort of circus figures that Blake was creating at this time, sort of derived from popular imagery and posters of circuses and wrestlers and boxers and the like. And based, in fact, on a photograph that he had found, but essentially invented. So these are the two sides of the show. Now, rather subtly, now that we're sponsored by Farrow and Ball, our colours are so subtle that we may not have noticed that the exhibition divides itself in two colours. And that division is intended to suggest the two halves of the show, the sort of those pictures rooted in realism and observation on the tan, or I can't remember what's the colour of what's it called? It's London stone. That's and then the others on pale blue. Two lovely colours that actually my living room was painted in one of them once. But anyway, that's the distinction within the show. But as we will see, and as I'm sure you have considered as you walk around the exhibition, the division is not clear remotely, and paintings could wander quite happily from brown to blue and back again if they wish to. But the show does open, in fact there's a little preamble, but as you turn the corner, the two paintings you see in front of you are absolutely rooted in a very particular moment in British figurative painting. And these are, well, this is Ewan Uglow's sort of monumental German girl. And Uglow was one of the artists studying at the Slade School of Art under William Coldstream in the 1950s, and who made an almost fetish of observational painting. And the stories about Uglow are legion in the way he sort of not quite tortured his models, although it came close to it, but would set up his studio on which, where he would mark out with little red lines the position of every limb of a body, and on the seat, on the chair or bench on which they would sit, he would draw outlines around where they sat, so when they came back they would sit in exactly the same place. There would be marks on the wall. These are not visible in his paintings, but he would mark on the wall behind his sitters where the shadows fell and so on. And then he would hang a sort of framework of plumb lines around the figure. So they were almost caged in this extraordinary network of lines, and then would spend his time measuring each element and trying to fasten it down, one-eyed, of course, monocular measurement, so fixing everything. And the German girl apparently sort of entered into the spirit of things by cutting tucks on her thighs, because obviously the other thing is where to keep her hands, and rather than mark it with a pen or a permanent marker, she apparently got out a razor blade and sliced where her thumbs needed to be. It's slightly sinister. There's this sort of obsession with sort of the accurate and sort of unmoving model. And it's also, and this is a very clear example, dictated by geometry as well. I mean, there are various paintings in which Bugler set up complex geometric progressions, if you like, through the painting. This is altogether simpler, but no less rigorous, in that we have the paintings exactly sliced in half by the corner of the rod, which, and you can see the corner of the rod slicing through the German girl's eye as well. And then if you follow that line down, it comes straight down through the line between her thighs as well. And equally, if you paint the skirting boards on either side and join those lines together, they meet absolutely at her navel. So she's sort of fixed into this geometric arrangement as well. But again, the head slips to one side, and it's a Piero della Francesca head. It's a head you see in, it's not quite the Piero della Francesca's entombment, but it nearly is, which again is very, Piero was an absolute sort of lodestar for these painters as well, concerned with. The other two artists in that sort of alcove at the beginning, who are obviously and equally concerned with the painting of individuals sitting in front of you from observation, are Lucy and Freud. Now, I'm really sorry about some of these images, but even a very good image of this lovely little drawing of Alice, which is in the group of drawings, could not do justice to it. I do urge you, if you haven't been to really pore over it, go and pore over this drawing, because it's simply wonderful. In particular, the lines that describe her arms, and because there are about 5 thin little pencil lines that sort of follow each other, describing the contours. It's an incredibly tender drawing, and tender is not a word that is usually associated, of course, with Lucian Freud. And this is a later painted portrait, but very typical. This is the one painting in the show that does not come from the Arts Council collection, because the Arts Council collection have a number of Freud paintings, but they were all on duty elsewhere. And so, luckily, our friends at Waddesdon, the National Trust House, but that's sort of semi-owned by the Rothschilds, with whom we have very good relations, lent us their portrait of Lord Rothschild. And it is a wonderful and very typical example of Freud's painting of flesh, and he's obviously most famously talked about wanting to make paint work as flesh, that the paint becomes the person in some strange way. And he's not an easy painter. I mean, he's not a Van Dyck, he's more of a Rembrandt. I mean, there's always this worry over the paint in Freud. And the surface of the paint can get fantastically distracting, that you sort of lose, the image is almost lost in these great mats of globular toothpaste-like paint. And there's a bit of that here. It's worrying over. There's a wonderful book, if you haven't read it, I think it's in our bookshop, it certainly was and is going to be, but by Martin Gayford, called The Man in the Blue Scarf, which is Martin Gayford describing being painted by Freud. Again, it's done with him present, but it's done in a most extraordinary way. He starts apparently in the middle and sort of just works outwards, bit by bit. It's about observation. It's not about the individual in front of you. And I think there's some, the whole of this alcove, although it's all about observation, it seems to me it's not about people to a great extent. Although the people are there, it's not like Gainsborough painting Nugent, where Gainsborough he's interested in what Nugent is as a man. These artists are about looking, observing, recording, and the individual is almost secondary. And in the case of Freud, often seems, it's the person putting themselves under Freud's gaze, and there's a certain amount of submission involved. That the person in control here is not Lord Rothschild, despite his extraordinary power, but Lucian Freud. And the same, I think, is true certainly in the case of Huglo, and probably H. just about visible within this picture, which is, I think it's a wonderful object. It's fantastic. The surface of it is extraordinary. They are difficult things, Auerbach's paintings, and the way in which they are born or created is extraordinary, in that, as I've said, he paints these same people over and over again, often in the same pose, working away. But at the end of every session, if we are to believe what we are told, and I think we have to, he finishes the session, looks at it, and then scrapes all that paint off and throws it onto a rag in the corner. So at the end of the day, you just get a shadow of what has been painted before. And then poor Juliet Yardley Mills goes away and comes back again the next day and takes up the same position, and he does it again. And then at the end of that session, he looks at it and scrapes all the paint off and sticks it in the corner. And on it goes until one glorious, miraculous day, he looks at it and says, okay, that'll do, and puts it in, and the painting is finished. And that is how he works. And we will learn more. His son, Jake Auerbach, is coming to show his film, which is called The Last Art Film, on, I think, 20-something of November. And Jake is going to talk about it too. So we will maybe learn more about Auerbach. If you look at this picture and then turn 100 together. Memory is part of what Hodgkin is painting. It's also a central idea, or it's central to a number of paintings in the exhibition, and we're now moving into here I think we're in fantasy land. We've got to be careful, of course, because maybe Letitia Yap, Geoffrey Camp's wife, did go out blackberry picking naked, and he stood there painting her, but I don't think she did. But you never know. It looks a bit chilly as well, the sort of grey skies above her. And I know they're not brambles, but even so, I think blackberry picking naked is not going to be that comfortable. Actually, it's black currants, isn't it? Sorry, I think it is black currants, because I think blackberries would simply be out of the question. But this is painted at Geoffrey Camp is a sort of romantic artist, and his paintings often include naked figures of Letitia, his wife, and himself, or both, or one or the other, and always with the sea in the background, the cliffs of Sussex, Hastings, and so I think, this is a fantasy. I think a very charming fantasy, and a rather wonderful picture. This is a memory, or using memory in a rather different way. This is Jock McFadden painting in the early 1980s. And this is the East End. This is Mile End Park, which is, of course, now all glorious and marvellous Olympic villagey stuff. But back then was green, paper-strewn wasteland with nasty-looking dogs with human heads. This is absolutely the Hogarthian tradition here of sort of caricatured urban types, low-life types, but a rather powerful one, I think. And memory, too, plays its part in Rose Wiley's sort of deliberately naive, but rather, I didn't like this painting, but this is a painting on a huge scale, really, of a little drawing done on a, we are told, W.H. Smith Whitfield block, which is what these lines are. So these lines, when you first see it, you think this is an identity parade of some sort, and it clearly has something of the usual suspects about it. But it's actually a sort of transcription, if you like, of the lines of a writing block. And this drawing from memory of her niece, I think it is Charlotte, I think she's called, dressed in a fancy orange outfit. And memory too, in a rather different and more, what's the word, perhaps considered way, is very much part of this portrait by Ken Kiff, called Portrait from Memory, of his father-in-law, with, as ever, these sort of ghostly figures. There's a face up here, and they're figured through the window. Kiff is, again, another romantic dreamer of an artist, who worries away at his paintings. His camera, I knew him when he was at the National Gallery. He was associate artist there, and I think he had a dreadful time there because there was a sort of time limit on the time that he came to the National Gallery and worked there for. And yet, if you look at the dates of this picture, it says 1980 to 85, reworked in 1988, and this is entirely typical. He couldn't ever bring himself to finish paintings, and they grow more dreamy and more complex in terms of their surface as time goes on. But again, it is a portrait, but it's also a fancy sort of from memory. If memory is one element, there's another story to be told through the show, and which is about photography. Thus far, we've avoided photography, but photography actually is a central, or is an important tool in a number of the images. Some of them on the brown side, around sort of, if you like, straightforward portrait or people painting. And the two works here from the early 60s, Mike Andrews and Peter Blake, who both used photographs in their portraiture and painting of people. And these, although they are both based on photographs and both real people, are scarcely portraits. We don't know who either of them actually are. But the Mike Andrews is a study for a much, much bigger picture, which is in Norwich. The Peter Blake, a rather delightful young boy eating a hot dog. He was apparently originally eating an ice cream, but then I couldn't find any information about this painting anywhere, so I rang Peter up and said, tell me something about it that I can put on the label. And he said, well, it used to be an ice cream, and the landscape's in Cornwall. So that's all that anybody knows about this show. And then this is Chantal Joff. So this is a hopeless image, but these two, these are taken from photographs from a clothes catalogue, but then sort of treated in such a way that they actually are I think, turned back into people in the way that clothes catalogues aren't people. She somehow, I think, turns these back into people, into individuals. And I think they're rather delightful and sort of potent little things. But if some artists are sort of using photographs to record, there are of course some key works in the show which use photographs to then play with them. And none more wonderfully than the Richard Hamilton of Hugh Gaitskell as the great monster of film land. I don't remember Hugh Gaitskell. He doesn't. There are plenty of political figures from the last century who one has a very firm idea of. Gaitskell is not one of them, as far as I'm concerned. So the poor man has become this figure, as far as I'm concerned. But this is Hamilton using a press image of Hugh Gaitskell and then amalgamating it with another photograph of the Phantom of the Opera from a film magazine. I think the film magazine was called The Great Monsters of Filmland. I think it might be issue 1 or issue 2, I can't remember. Who was it as Phantom of the Opera? Who? Claude Rains. Claude Rains as Phantom of the Opera. So yes, it's half masked. And for Hamilton, anyway, the reason Gaitskell was a monster was that he wouldn't apparently sign up to a nuclear disarmament, a non-nuclear policy. But by the time, as you can read on the label, by the time this picture was painted, Gaitskell was actually dead. So it became a sort of, an added layer, if you like, was added to the painting. And then I think one of my favourite paintings in the show is this one, which is also has as its starting point a photograph. And this is by the Croatian-Canadian-English painter called Milena Dragosevich. And she's coming to talk about her painting in not too long, a couple of weeks, I think, with Hugh Locke, who did The Queen. So we will learn more from her about what she's trying to do with these paintings. She's very firm about what she's not trying to do, because I sort of made various suggestions to her, and she, no, that's not what I'm doing. These are not portraits, she says, and they're not masked individuals, she says. They are something else, she says. What sort of something else, I say? A mysterious something else, she says. And so, I don't know. Except I do know that they are, and they're one of a series of paintings that she calls supplicants. And they're all these, although she says they're not masked individuals, they are all individuals in there, which is among, and for me anyway, it's that sense of the individual sort of, and it's not masked, what's the word, sort of interfered with in some way, in a rather sinister way, that gives these images their power, that people, this figure has been muted, if you like, and is mouthless, and has this strange protuberance. But above everything else, though, it's a wonderful bit of painting, I think. It's very beautiful. A series of paintings that he made of similar scenes, as he did one of the balcony of Buckingham Palace and the changing of the guard, and so scenes of pageantry and national celebrations, but rendered as if they were sort of white abstract paintings. And, well, I rather like them, but they are, because of the incongruity, really, of this juxtaposition of the icon of abstract modernism, sort of the black square and the white square of early Russian modernists, and yet with these deeply traditional sort of scenes hidden within them. And both, if you like, both early abstract modernism and the scenes of British pageantry are dead traditions, I think is what Coventry Navy system. But not, so that's photography, and finally, well, not quite finally, but then there are also invented people. Sorry, it's looking quite nice on my screen. You can see the invisible here. It's a rather wonderful picture, I hope, and it's by Lynette Yadon-Boyaki, who I'm sure you are aware is on the shortlist for this year's Turner Prize. I'll be amazed if she wins it, because, not because I don't like what she does, but actually maybe because I do like what she does. But she paints people, and she paints people that look for all the world like portraits, and yet they're not. They're all fancy creations. She's creating people in paint. She does speak about doing so as if she's the first person ever to have done it. And one looks at the Moreland here and thinks, well, people have been creating, this maid never existed. She is a creation in paint, and there are countless others throughout the history of art. But anyway, that is what Lynette is doing. And they are rather wonderful paintly things. And they have a degree of mystery about them. These sort of the feathered collar that this chap wears. It's called ortolan, and it's one of a series of birds, all with these feathered collars, suggesting, are they dancers? Are they birds men of some description? So there is mystery. The version we have here is the one in which Bacon gets most carried away in terms of the expressive use of the paint. And this is at the moment when people like de Kooning, the great abstract expressionist, American abstract expressionist, was being shown in England, and Bacon is looking to them as well. And this strip here is very unusual for Bacon, in that he seems to have sort of finished painting here, and then because there are series, he allows himself a completely abstract strip at the bottom. I mean, it's as Rothko, Pollock-esque as Bacon ever gets in terms of using paint simply being paint, sort of pure, flat, abstract use of paint at the bottom of the picture. And in all these pictures, the shadow plays its role as it does in the Van Gogh. Here, the road seems to sort of be sort of leaping up in front of the others. I think he seems to know where he's going in this one. I must stop because I've been talking far too long. But just another wonderful picture in the show, just the Paul Arago. In some ways, we've squeezed this in. It's clearly less portrait than narrative picture, although it is equally about people. Paul Arago's people are always based on individuals she knows, but then she puts them into these strange... adults often appear as children, children appear as adults. She plays with the people she knows. And then puts them into these strange, narrative, mythologically inspired, inspired by religious imagery as well, all suggesting but not revealing what's going on. And she delights in people inventing stories around them. I mean, I think for her, they are the starting point for story making. And she weaves sort of mischievous stories around all her pictures, but they change each time she tells the stories. And so they are for you, if you like, the weave stories around a sort of these, who's dreaming who, if you like. And then various elements like the razor and the race and the purple and the pelican, all suggesting some sort of symbolic significance, but none of it quite graspable. And finally, although maybe one should say firstly, we have the Hugh Locke, Hugh Locke's Queen, who greets us as we enter the exhibition. I think it's wonderful to have this piece. I think it's a spectacular thing. It's been very frustrating because you could never talk about painting in any title of the show. You couldn't say paintings from the Arts Council collection because it's clearly not a painting. But it plays with the idea of the person, I think, in the same way that so many pictures in the exhibition do. In some ways, it does a very similar. There's a very similar thing to the Hugh Gates one. Although, of course, the person behind the image of the Queen is even more hidden than the person behind the image of a politician. And Locke has talked of the Queen in this image of staring, sort of in this frightened stare from behind this agglomeration that is sort of covering her. But equally, of course, in the traditional image of the Queen, the stare the human stare could be seen as equally scared behind the figurehead of the state that the Queen's image is. Hugh Locke was brought up in British Guiana, where we are told there was the image of the Queen's head on every exercise book. So the image of the Queen for him is absolutely sort of associated with with colonial rule and the end of that colonial rule. All is not, and Queen's heads is what he does. This is one of a large series of images and sculptures of the Queen, played with, distorted, and disguised in all kinds of different ways. But here it's part fetish object. These bits of cheap plastic, I'm not quite sure what they are, but they recall those sort of nails hammered into fetish objects. And then it's bedecked with seemingly, golden chains and jewels, which are, of course, all cheap plastic cups. There are wonderful details in it as well, there are monkeys and lions and skeletons, and the Queen's mouth is erupting with insects and scorpions in a slightly startling way. So an arresting image, I would say, and one with which to end. So and to begin the show. So thank you very much.